You wanted to take everything.
Now all you have are handcuffs and another man's child.
The photographs landed on my desk like a death sentence. 36 shots of my wife Sadie wrapped around another man, her wedding ring catching the afternoon light as she pressed her mouth against his neck. Felix Griggs, the private investigator I'd hired, watched me flip through each image with the detached interest of a coroner examining a corpse. "When?" I asked, my voice steady despite the earthquake in my chest. "Every Tuesday for 8 months, Felix said, lighting a cigarette despite the no smoking sign on my office wall. "Mason Thorne, your business partner." Real piece of work, that one. Mason Thorne. The man who'd helped me build Rennick Construction from nothing into a $15 million operation. The man who'd been best man at my wedding. The man who'd looked me in the eye just yesterday and asked about weekend plans with Sadie. I set the photos down carefully, like they might explode. "What else?" Felix pulled out a manila folder, thick as a phone book. "Bank records show she's been moving money. Small amounts, but regular. 3 grand here, 5 grand there. All going to an account under her maiden name." The numbness spreading through my limbs felt almost merciful. 23 years of marriage, and Sadie had been preparing her exit strategy for months, maybe years. "There's more," Felix said, and the way he hesitated made my stomach drop. "She's pregnant." The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the temple. Sadie had told me 3 years ago that she couldn't have children. "A complication from endometriosis," she'd said. We'd mourned together, held each other through the grief of a future that would never come. "How far along?" I asked. 4 months, according to her OB/GYN appointment records. 4 months. The timeline made my throat close. We hadn't been intimate in over 6 months, not since Sadie started claiming she was too tired, too stressed, too busy with her new job at the marketing firm. The same marketing firm where Mason had helped her get the position. "Blake," Felix said, leaning forward, "I've been doing this for 20 years. I've seen men lose everything because they couldn't think straight when the ground fell out from under them. Don't be one of those men." I looked at him through the gray haze of cigarette smoke. Felix Griggs was pushing 60, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades watching people's lives fall apart. His reputation was questionable at best, but his results were undeniable. "What do you suggest?" I asked. "Nothing yet. Watch." "Wait, learn what they're planning before you make your move." He stubbed out his cigarette on my desk, leaving a black mark on the mahogany surface. "Because trust me, they're planning something." That evening, I sat in my leather chair by the fireplace, nursing a whiskey and watching Sadie move around our kitchen. She was humming something under her breath, her hand unconsciously resting on her still flat stomach. The gesture made me want to throw my glass against the wall. "How was your day?" she asked, the same question she'd asked every evening for over 2 decades. "Fine," I said, the same answer I'd given for just as long. But tonight, everything was different. Tonight, I was seeing her clearly for the first time in years. The way she avoided eye contact, the way she kept checking her phone, the way she'd positioned herself near the kitchen island, ready to bolt if necessary. "I'm going upstairs," she said after we'd eaten dinner in silence. "Early meeting tomorrow." I nodded and watched her go, counting her footsteps on the hardwood stairs. 14 steps to the landing. Turn left. 12 more steps to our bedroom. The door closing with the soft click that had once meant home and safety. Now it meant war. My phone buzzed with a text from Felix. "Call me when you're alone." I stepped onto the back patio and dialed his number. "She's at Thorne's place right now," Felix said without preamble. "Left through the garage 5 minutes after she went upstairs, parked 3 blocks away and walked." The confirmation felt like swallowing glass. "How long have you been watching the house?" "Since this afternoon. Blake, there's something else. I planted a bug in her car last week. You need to hear this." He played an audio file over the phone. Sadie's voice clear as crystal. "We need to move faster, Mason. Blake's getting suspicious. He asked about the bank account yesterday." Mason's voice deeper, more confident. "Relax. Everything's in place. Once we trigger the mental health evaluation, we'll have control of his assets through the conservatorship. The pregnancy just makes it easier to claim he's unstable." My hand tightened on the phone until the plastic creaked. Sadie again. What if he fights it? Then we have the recordings of his episodes. The judge will see a man who can't handle stress, who's becoming violent and erratic. Especially when he finds out about the baby. "The baby that isn't his," Mason said, and they both laughed. The line went dead. I stood in the darkness of my backyard, listening to the sound of my life cracking apart like ice on a frozen lake. Felix had been right. They weren't just planning to leave me. They were planning to destroy me, to take everything I'd built and leave me institutionalized and broke. The pregnancy wasn't an accident. It was ammunition. I walked back inside and climbed the 14 steps to the landing, turned left, took 12 more steps to our bedroom door. It was slightly ajar, and I could see Sadie's shape under the covers, her phone glowing as she texted someone. "Good night, honey," I said softly. "Good night," she replied without looking up. I went to the guest room and lay awake until dawn, planning. Felix had given me the most valuable gift possible, knowledge of my enemy's strategy. Now I needed to turn their tools against them. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to Felix's office in the seedier part of downtown. His building smelled like mold and desperation, with a pawn shop on the ground floor and what looked like a bookie operation in the basement. "You look like heck," Felix said when I walked into his cramped office. "I need your help," I said. "All of it, whatever it costs." He leaned back in his chair, studying me with eyes that had seen too much. "This isn't about saving your marriage anymore. No. It's about making sure they don't destroy me on their way out." Felix smiled for the first time since I'd met him. "Now we're talking. But Blake, once we start down this road, there's no going back. You understand that?" I thought about Sadie's hand on her stomach, about Mason's laughter, about 23 years of my life being reduced to a legal maneuver and a conservatorship filing. "I understand," I said. "Good. First thing we need to do is give them exactly what they want. If they want you to look unstable, then that's what they'll get. But we control the narrative." Over the next week, I began my performance. It started small, forgetting appointments, snapping at employees, showing up to job sites looking disheveled. Nothing too dramatic, just enough to plant seeds. Sadie noticed immediately. "Blake, are you feeling all right?" she asked one evening, her voice dripping with false concern. "You seem different lately." "Just work stress," I said, letting my hand shake slightly as I reached for my coffee cup. "The Morrison project is falling behind and I can't seem to focus." I watched her eyes light up with something that looked like hunger. She was already recording our conversation on her phone, probably sending updates to Mason about my mental deterioration. The Morrison project was actually ahead of schedule, but Sadie didn't know that. She hadn't shown real interest in my work in years, content to spend the money I earned without caring how I earned it. "Maybe you should see someone," she suggested. "A therapist. Or a doctor." "I'm fine," I said, raising my voice just enough to seem defensive. "Why does everyone keep saying I need help?" She flinched at my tone, and I saw her thumb move across her phone screen. Another recording for their collection. That night, Felix called with an update. "They're accelerating the timeline. Mason's been talking to lawyers about the conservatorship process. They want to move before you have a chance to hide assets. How long do we have? Couple weeks, maybe less. How's the performance going?" She's recording everything, building their case brick by brick. "Perfect. Tomorrow we start phase 2. Phase 2 involved a public meltdown at the job site. I'd arranged for several employees to witness me screaming at a subcontractor over a minor measurement error, throwing blueprints around like confetti. The performance was Oscar-worthy, complete with threats to fire the entire crew and accusations that everyone was sabotaging me. Mason showed up an hour later, playing the concerned business partner to perfection. "Blake, what's going on?" he asked, his arm around my shoulders like we were still friends. "The guys are worried about you." I looked at him with wild eyes, seeing the calculation behind his mask of concern. "They're all against me, Mason. Even you, probably. Everyone wants to see me fail." "That's not true, buddy. We're all on your team here." The word buddy made my jaw clench, but I forced myself to lean into his embrace like a broken man seeking comfort. "I don't know what's wrong with me. I can't think straight anymore." "Why don't you take some time off? Let me handle things for a while." Exactly what he wanted. Control of the company while I was deemed unfit to run it. "Maybe you're right," I said, my voice cracking with manufactured desperation. "Maybe I do need help." That evening, Sadie was practically vibrating with excitement. She kept glancing at her phone, probably coordinating with Mason about the next steps in their plan. "Honey," she said during dinner, "Mason called. He's worried about you. Everyone's worried about me, I muttered, stabbing at my steak with unnecessary violence. Maybe I should just disappear, leave you all alone? Her hand moved protectively to her stomach. Don't say things like that. Why not? It's not like you'd miss me. You're barely here anymore. That's not fair, Blake. My job requires long hours. Your job, I repeated with a bitter laugh. Right. The job Mason got you. Something flickered across her face. Guilt, maybe, or fear that I was connecting dots I wasn't supposed to connect. What's that supposed to mean? She asked. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Nothing. Forget it. I'm going to bed. As I walked away, I heard her phone buzzing with incoming messages. No doubt Mason wanted a full report on my latest breakdown. The next few days followed the same pattern. I escalated my erratic behavior while Felix worked behind the scenes, gathering intelligence on their financial arrangements and legal preparations. The picture that emerged was more sophisticated than I'd expected. Mason had been siphoning money from our joint business accounts for months, moving it through a series of shell companies that ultimately led back to offshore accounts. Sadie's pregnancy wasn't just leverage for the conservatorship, it was insurance. Even if I somehow fought their legal maneuvers, the child support and alimony would cripple me financially. They'd thought of everything, except for Felix Griggs and his network of questionable contacts. A time for the nuclear option, Felix said during our meeting on Friday. You ready for this? He slid a photograph across his desk. It showed a young woman with dark hair and expensive clothes walking into an upscale hotel. She looked like she could be Sadie's younger sister. Who is she? I asked. Professional, goes by the name Elena. Very discreet, very expensive, and very good at what she does. Which is creating compromising situations. Mason has a weakness for brunettes, especially ones who remind him of his ex-wife. Elena's going to accidentally bump into him at his favorite bar tomorrow night. I studied the photograph, understanding dawning slowly. You want to set him up. I want to give him exactly what he's already looking for. Men like Mason can't resist the thrill of a new conquest, especially when they think they're getting away with something. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Elena would seduce Mason, get him to a hotel room where Felix had cameras waiting, then present him with an ultimatum. Pay up or have the footage sent to his wife, his business associates, and the local news stations. What about Sadie? I asked. That's where it gets interesting. Mason will panic and tell her about the blackmail. She'll insist they handle it quietly, maybe even help pay the blackmailer off. But here's the thing. Elena isn't actually going to take their money. What? Felix's grin was predatory. She's going to take their money and then release the footage anyway. Make it look like Mason tried to cheat the blackmailer and got burned. Sadie will realize she can't trust him. Mason will realize he's been played, and they'll turn on each other. It was brilliant and completely unethical, and exactly what they deserved. How much? I asked. 50,000. But Blake, once we do this, there's no pretending it's about justice or protecting yourself. This is pure revenge. I thought about the recordings of them laughing about the baby that wasn't mine, about the conservatorship papers Mason was preparing, about 23 years of marriage reduced to a legal strategy session. Do it, I said. That weekend, I maintained my performance of a man slowly losing his grip on reality. I forgot to shave, wore the same clothes 2 days in a row, and had a very public argument with a cashier at the grocery store over expired coupons. Sadie documented everything, her phone camera always ready to capture my latest episode. Sunday evening, Mason called with fake concern in his voice. Blake, buddy, we need to talk. Can you meet me for breakfast tomorrow? Sure, I said, injecting just the right amount of confusion into my voice. Is everything okay? Everything's fine. I just want to check in on you. But when Monday morning came, Mason didn't show up for breakfast. I sat in the diner for 2 hours, calling his phone and leaving increasingly agitated voicemails. The performance was for the benefit of the waitress and other customers, all potential witnesses to my deteriorating mental state. Felix called that afternoon with an update. Elena made contact. Mason took the bait faster than expected. They're at the Marriott downtown right now. And Sadie? Thinks he's in a client meeting. She's at work, planning your intervention for tonight. My intervention. The moment when they'd spring their trap, presenting me with evidence of my mental breakdown and insisting I seek immediate treatment at a facility Mason had undoubtedly pre-selected. How long until the blackmail demand? I asked. Elena will make contact with Mason tomorrow morning. Give him 24 hours to panic before she reaches out to Sadie. I spent that evening preparing for the intervention, practicing my responses, and making sure my performance stayed consistent. When Sadie came home, she was accompanied by Mason and a woman I didn't recognize, probably a social worker or counselor they'd hired to legitimize the proceeding. "Blake," Sadie said gently, "we need to talk." They staged it perfectly. The dining room table was set with coffee and tissues, the lighting soft and non-threatening. Mason sat across from me with his concerned business partner expression, while the social worker took notes on a legal pad. "We're worried about you," Sadie began. "Your behavior lately has been concerning." I let my hands shake as I reached for my coffee cup. "What do you mean?" "The incident at the job site," Mason said. "The problems with concentration. The mood swings." "Everyone has bad days," I protested, but my voice lacked conviction. The social worker leaned forward. "Mr. Rennick, your wife and business partner have documented several episodes of erratic behavior over the past few weeks. They're concerned for your safety and the safety of others." "Documented?" I looked at Sadie with wounded eyes. "You've been spying on me?" "Not spying," she said quickly. "Just paying attention." "Blake, you threatened to fire your entire crew over a 2-inch measurement error. You forgot 3 important meetings last week. Yesterday you got into a shouting match with a teenager at the grocery store." All true, all carefully orchestrated, all designed to build their case for legal control over my life and assets. "I think you should consider a short stay at a treatment facility," the social worker said. "Somewhere you can get the help you need without the stress of daily responsibilities." "What about the business?" I asked, playing my role as the confused victim. "I'll handle everything," Mason assured me. "That's what partners are for." I let them see the defeat in my shoulders, the resignation in my eyes. Maybe you're right. Maybe I do need help." Sadie's relief was palpable. Mason's satisfaction was disgusting. The social worker made more notes on her pad, probably calculating her fee for participating in this elaborate fraud. But I didn't sign anything that night. I told them I needed time to think, to process what they were asking. They agreed, probably confident that my deteriorating mental state would make me easier to manipulate in a day or two. Tuesday morning brought Felix's call. Mason got the blackmail demand an hour ago. "Elena wants 100,000 or the footage goes public." How did he react? "Panic. Pure panic. He called Sadie immediately, but she was in a meeting. Left 6 voicemails begging her to call him back." I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. After months of carefully orchestrating my downfall, Mason was finally experiencing what it felt like to have his world collapse without warning. "What's the next move?" I asked. "We wait. Let them scramble for a few hours. Elena will escalate the pressure this afternoon, maybe threaten to release a preview clip to Mason's wife." Mason's wife, Jennifer, was a prominent socialite who served on charity boards and hosted fundraising galas. The exposure would destroy more than just Mason's marriage. It would obliterate his position in the business community. That evening, Sadie came home looking haggard. Her phone had been buzzing constantly, and she kept stepping into the next room to take calls. I pretended not to notice, maintaining my performance as a man too mentally unstable to pick up on social cues. "How was your day?" I asked with the vacant smile of someone medicated. "Fine," she said tersely, then caught herself. Busy. Work was busy." She disappeared upstairs, and I could hear her voice through the bedroom door, sharp with stress and anger. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. Mason had told her about the blackmail, and she was furious. Wednesday morning brought the explosion I'd been waiting for. Sadie's phone rang at 6 a.m., and Mason's voice was loud enough to wake me from my pretended sleep. "She's going to release it anyway," he was shouting. "I paid the witch $50,000, and she's saying it was just a down payment." "Keep your voice down," Sadie hissed, but I could hear every word through the thin bedroom walls. "This is your fault," Mason continued. "You said Blake was almost broken, that we could move forward with the conservatorship this week. Now we're dealing with blackmail and extortion." "My fault. You're the one who couldn't keep it in your pants for another month. Don't act like you're innocent in this. You've been planning to screw over Blake just as much as I have." The argument continued for another 10 minutes, their voices rising and falling as they blamed each other for their predicament. I lay in bed listening to their partnership crumble, feeling a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with revenge. When Sadie finally hung up, she stayed in the bedroom for another hour. I could hear her making calls, probably to lawyers and financial advisors, trying to figure out how to contain the damage from Mason's indiscretion. I got up and made coffee, humming softly to myself. When Sadie finally came downstairs, she looked like she'd aged 5 years overnight. "Blake," she said carefully, "we need to postpone our discussion about the treatment facility." "Why?" I asked, tilting my head with innocent confusion. "There are some business complications. Mason is dealing with a personal issue that's affecting the company." "What kind of personal issue?" She hesitated, probably trying to figure out how much to tell me. "Someone is trying to extort money from him, false accusations about inappropriate behavior." I let my eyes widen with shock. "Extortion? That's terrible. What kind of false accusations?" "It doesn't matter. The point is, we need to focus on protecting the business right now. Your treatment can wait a week or two." A week or two. Long enough for them to figure out whether they could contain the scandal or whether they needed to accelerate their plans to seize control of my assets before the blackmail story became public. "Of course," I said agreeably. "Whatever you think is best." That afternoon, Felix called with the final update. "Elena released the footage this morning, posted it on 3 different adult websites with Mason's full name and business information. It's already got 50,000 views." I felt something cold and satisfied settle in my chest. "What about Sadie?" "She's been fielding calls all day. Reporters, business associates, even Mason's wife. The story's going to break in the local news tonight." By evening, Mason's professional reputation was in ruins. The footage showed him in unmistakably compromising positions with a woman who was clearly not his wife, along with audio of him bragging about his business deals and his plans to take over Rennick Construction. Sadie came home that night looking like a ghost. Her phone had stopped ringing, never a good sign in a crisis. "The news wants a statement," she said without preamble. "About Mason. About the business." "What kind of statement?" I asked. "Damage control. We need to distance ourselves from Mason's personal problems." I nodded thoughtfully, still playing the confused but cooperative husband. "Maybe we should call that social worker back. Get me into treatment before the reporters start asking about my mental health." Sadie's relief was visible. That's actually a good idea. Show that we're taking responsibility, getting help." But I had no intention of making their lives easier. That night, I called Felix with new instructions. "Time for phase 3, I said. "I want to know everything about their financial arrangements. Every shell company, every hidden account, every illegal transaction. Blake, we're already past the point of no return. You sure you want to keep pushing?" I thought about Mason's voice on the recording, laughing about the baby that wasn't mine, about Sadie's hand on her stomach, using her pregnancy as a tool against me. "I'm sure," I said. The next morning brought a knock on my door from 2 FBI agents investigating financial irregularities at Rennick Construction. They had evidence of money laundering, tax evasion, and fraud, all tied to Mason's shell companies and offshore accounts. Sadie was at work when they arrived, which was fortunate for my performance. I answered their questions with the bewildered confusion of a man whose mental state made him unreliable but sympathetic. "I don't understand," I kept saying. "Mason handles all the financial stuff. I just run the construction crews." Which was partially true. I'd deliberately stayed hands-off with the company's finances, focusing on the operational side while Mason managed the books. It was a decision that now made me look naive rather than complicit. The agents left with boxes of documents and a promise to return with more questions. I called Sadie immediately, letting panic creep into my voice. "The FBI was here," I said. "They're asking about Mason and money and things I don't understand." She was quiet for a long moment. "What did you tell them?" "The truth. That I don't know anything about the financial side? That Mason handles all of that?" Another pause. "Blake, don't talk to them again without a lawyer present." "Are we in trouble?" "I don't know. Maybe. Blake, I'm coming home. We need to figure this out." But when she arrived an hour later, she wasn't alone. Mason was with her, looking haggard and desperate. The scandal had cost him his marriage, his reputation, and now his freedom was in jeopardy. "Blake," he said, his voice tight with stress, "we need to talk about the FBI investigation." I looked at him with the wide-eyed innocence of a mental patient. "Are we going to jail?" "Not if we handle this right," Mason said. "But we need to get our stories straight. You, me, and Sadie, we're all in this together." The irony was delicious. The man who'd been planning to destroy me was now begging for my cooperation to save himself. "I'm scared," I said, letting my voice tremble. "Maybe I should tell them everything I know." "No," Mason said quickly. "Blake, you're not in the right headspace to be talking to federal agents. That's why we wanted you to get treatment, remember? Your mental health issues make you unreliable." Sadie shot him a warning look, but the damage was done. He'd just admitted in front of me that they'd been planning to use my fabricated mental illness to discredit me. "What mental health issues?" I asked with perfect innocence. The silence stretched between them like a held breath. They'd been so focused on their conspiracy that they'd forgotten I was supposed to be unaware of their plans. "Just stress," Sadie said, finally. "Work stress. You've been under a lot of pressure." I nodded agreeably, but I could see the calculation in their eyes. They were realizing that their careful plan was falling apart, that their tool against me might not be as reliable as they'd hoped. That evening, after Mason left, Sadie tried a different approach. "Blake," she said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table, "there's something I need to tell you." Here it comes, I thought. The pregnancy revelation they'd been saving for maximum impact. "I'm pregnant," she said, her hand moving to her stomach in that gesture I'd come to despise. I let my face cycle through shock, confusion, and joy, the expected reactions of a husband receiving wonderful news. "Pregnant," I repeated. "But the doctors said—" "I know what they said. But sometimes miracles happen." I reached across the table and took her hand, looking into her eyes with all the love I could fake. "This is incredible. How far along?" 4 months? 4 months. The timeline that proved the child wasn't mine, though I was supposed to be too mentally unstable to do the math. 4 months? I said, my voice catching with manufactured emotion. "And you didn't tell me?" "I wanted to be sure. And with everything that's been happening with your health—" "My health?" She squeezed my hand. "Blake, we've talked about this. The stress, the confusion, the mood swings. I was worried about how you'd handle the news." I stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the backyard where I'd first learned about their betrayal. When I turned back, my face was wet with tears that were surprisingly real. "Are you sure it's mine?" I asked. The question hung in the air like smoke. Sadie's face went pale, and I could see her mind racing through possible responses. "Of course it's yours," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Blake, why would you ask something like that?" "Because we haven't— it's been so long since we—" "Since we what?" "Since we were together, really together." She looked at me with something that might have been pity. "Blake, we made love just 5 months ago. Don't you remember? It was your birthday." My birthday. 6 months ago, not 5. Another small lie in service of a larger deception. "Right," I said, wiping my eyes. "My birthday." "I'm sorry. My memory has been so foggy lately." "That's why we want you to get help," she said gently. "The confusion, the memory problems, they're all symptoms of the stress you've been under." I nodded like a man grasping for hope. "You really think treatment will help?" "I know it will." That night, I called Felix from the guest bedroom, speaking in whispers. "They played the pregnancy card," I said. "How did you handle it?" "Like a confused husband who might be starting to suspect the truth, but doesn't want to believe it?" "Perfect. Blake, I've got news about the FBI investigation. Mason's in deeper trouble than we thought." Felix had traced the money trail through Mason's shell companies, uncovering a web of fraud that went back 3 years. Mason hadn't just been stealing from our company. He'd been running a complex scheme involving fake subcontractors, inflated material costs, and kickbacks from suppliers. "The FBI has enough evidence to put him away for 15 years, Felix said. "But here's the interesting part. Sadie's been helping him." My blood went cold. "What do you mean?" "Her marketing firm was one of the fake contractors. She's been billing the company for services that never existed, splitting the money with Mason through her offshore accounts. So it wasn't just adultery and betrayal. It was systematic theft, with my wife and business partner stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars while planning to have me declared mentally incompetent. How long until the FBI figures out her involvement? I asked. Depends on how thorough their investigation is. Could be days, could be weeks. I made a decision that surprised even me with its coldness. I want to help them figure it out faster. Blake, they wanted to destroy me, Felix. They wanted to take everything I'd built and leave me in a psychiatric facility while they spent my money and raised another man's child. I'm not going to sit back and let them get away with any of it. The next morning, I called the FBI agents and arranged a meeting. When they arrived, I was waiting with a stack of documents I'd pulled from my home office, contracts, invoices, and financial records that would help them trace the money Mason and Sadie had stolen. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, I told Agent Sarah Morrison, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s. And I realized there are some things about our business relationship that might be relevant. I played the role perfectly. A concerned business owner who was just beginning to understand that his partner might have been taking advantage of his mental health issues. Mason has been handling more and more of the financial side over the past year, I said. He said it was to reduce my stress, but now I'm wondering if there was another reason. Agent Morrison took notes while her partner, Agent David Park, reviewed the documents I'd provided. Mr. Rennick, Agent Park said. These invoices from Sadie Marketing Solutions. Can you tell us what services they provided? I looked at the papers with confused eyes. I'm not sure. Mason said Sadie's company was handling our marketing, but I don't remember seeing any advertising or promotional materials. Your wife's company? Agent Morrison asked. Yes, Mason helped her get the contract. Said it would be good to keep the money in the family. The agents exchanged glances. They were starting to see the shape of the conspiracy, the way Mason and Sadie had used their personal relationships to cover their financial crimes. Mr. Rennick, Agent Morrison said carefully, we're going to need to interview your wife as part of this investigation. I let my face crumple with worry. Is she in trouble? Sadie's been under so much stress lately, and with the pregnancy. Your wife is pregnant? Agent Park asked. 4 months, I said, then hesitated as if realizing I might have said too much. She didn't want anyone to know yet, not with everything that's happening with the business. After the agents left, I sat in my office and waited for the explosion. It came 2 hours later, when Sadie burst through the front door, her face flushed with anger and panic. What did you tell them? She demanded. I looked up from my newspaper with mild confusion. Tell who? The FBI agents. They want to interview me tomorrow about Mason's financial irregularities. Oh, I said, as if just remembering. They asked about some invoices from your company. I told them Mason handled all the financial stuff. What else did you tell them? Nothing much. Just that Mason said your company was doing our marketing, but I couldn't remember seeing any of the work. She stared at me like I'd just signed her death warrant, which, in a way, I had. Blake, she said, her voice tight with controlled panic, I need you to listen very carefully. When you talk to the FBI, you need to be consistent. Don't volunteer information. Don't speculate about things you don't understand. Are you in trouble? I asked with innocent concern. We could all be in trouble if this gets out of hand. The investigation, the media attention, it could destroy everything we've built. I nodded slowly, like a man trying to process information beyond his comprehension. Maybe I should get that treatment after all. Before I say something that makes things worse. Her relief was palpable. Yes, that's exactly what you should do. In fact, I've already called Dr. Patterson. He can see you tomorrow morning. Doctor. Patterson was the psychiatrist they'd selected for my evaluation, the one who would provide the professional opinion necessary for their conservatorship filing. Okay, I said agreeably, if you think it will help. That night, Sadie barely slept. I could hear her moving around the house, making phone calls, probably coordinating with Mason and their lawyers about damage control strategies. But their window for controlling the narrative was closing fast. The next morning, I kept my appointment with Dr. Patterson, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who looked like he'd stepped out of a 1950s psychiatric textbook. Mr. Rennick, he said, settling into his leather chair with a notepad. Your wife tells me you've been experiencing some difficulties lately. I spent 45 minutes giving him exactly what he expected. confusion about recent events, memory lapses, emotional volatility. But I was careful to plant seeds of doubt about Sadie and Mason's version of events. "Doctor," I said near the end of the session, "sometimes I wonder if people are taking advantage of my condition. Like, I'll sign something or agree to something, and later I can't remember doing it." His pen stopped moving. "Can you give me an example?" "Well, Mason keeps bringing me papers to sign for the business. He says they're routine, but I feel like I'm signing my life away piece by piece. Have you discussed this with your wife?" "Sadie always agrees with Mason. Sometimes I think—" I paused, looking troubled. "Sometimes I think they talk about me when I'm not around, planning things." Dr. Patterson made more notes. "What kind of things?" "I don't know. Maybe it's just paranoia. But I found some papers in Sadie's purse last week. Something about conservatorship. I asked her about it, but she said I was confused." The doctor's expression shifted slightly. He was starting to wonder if my paranoia might have some basis in reality. "Mr. Rennick, do you feel safe at home?" "Most of the time. But lately it feels like Sadie and Mason are waiting for something. Like they're just counting down the days until something happens." I left his office unsure whether I'd convinced him I was mentally unstable or whether I'd planted enough doubt to make him question the people pushing for my commitment. That afternoon, Felix called with urgent news. "The FBI arrested Mason an hour ago. Full raid on his office, agents walking out with boxes of evidence." I felt a surge of savage satisfaction. "What about Sadie?" "They're interviewing her right now." "Blake, her lawyer is already talking about plea deals." When Sadie came home that evening, she looked like she'd been hollowed out from the inside. Her perfect composure was gone, replaced by the raw fear of someone who'd just realized their carefully constructed lies were crumbling. "Mason's been arrested," she said without preamble. I looked up from the television with appropriate shock. "Arrested? For what?" "Financial crimes. The FBI thinks he's been stealing from the company." "Our company?" She nodded, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach. "Blake, there's something else. They think I might have been involved." I muted the television and gave her my full attention. "Involved how?" "The marketing contract. They're saying the work was never done, that it was just a way to move money." "But you did work for us," I said with confused loyalty. "I remember you working on marketing stuff." Her eyes filled with tears, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her in months. "Blake, I need you to remember exactly what you told the FBI about my company." "I told them the truth. That Mason said you were handling our marketing, but I couldn't remember seeing any of the actual work." "That's all?" "I think so. My memory is so fuzzy lately." She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she looked up, her face was full of desperation. "Blake, they're offering me a deal. If I cooperate with their investigation, they'll recommend a lighter sentence." "Sentence?" I repeated. "Sadie, are you saying you actually did steal from the company?" The question hung between us like a blade. She could lie, try to maintain her innocence, but we both knew the FBI had evidence. Or she could tell the truth and hope for mercy. "It wasn't supposed to hurt you," she said finally. "Mason said we were just reorganizing the finances, making the company more efficient." "By stealing from it?" "By taking what we deserved. Blake, you have no idea how to run a business. Mason built that company while you played with your construction crews." The mask was finally coming off. All the fake concern, all the manipulative caring, it was dissolving into raw resentment and entitlement. "So you decided to steal from me," I said, my voice flat. "We decided to take control before you ran everything into the ground." "And the baby?" She went very still. "What about the baby? Is it mine?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I could see her calculating, trying to figure out whether honesty or continued deception would serve her better. "Does it matter?" she asked finally. The coldness in her voice was breathtaking. After 23 years of marriage, she was asking if it mattered whether she was carrying another man's child. "It matters to me," I said. "The baby is Mason's," she said, the words coming out like broken glass. "But Blake, that doesn't change anything between us. We can still work this out." I stood up slowly, looking at this woman I thought I knew. "Work what out exactly?" "The FBI wants Mason. If I testify against him, they'll go easy on me. We can blame everything on him, the theft, the affair, the pregnancy. You and I can rebuild." The audacity was stunning. She was asking me to help her destroy the man she'd been planning to run away with, the father of her unborn child, just to save herself from the consequences of their joint betrayal. "What about the conservatorship?" I asked. Her face went pale. "How do you know about that?" "I know about a lot of things, Sadie. I know about the recordings you've been making. I know about the fake mental health crisis you and Mason orchestrated. I know about the pregnancy you've been hiding for 4 months." She stared at me like I was a stranger. "You've been pretending to be sick. I've been pretending to be a lot of things." The realization hit her like a physical blow. All those carefully documented episodes of mental instability, all those recordings of my confused rambling, all the evidence they'd gathered for their legal case, it was all performance. "How long have you known?" she whispered. "About the affair?" 8 months. About the pregnancy? 4 months. About the conservatorship plan? 2 weeks. She sank into the nearest chair, her face gray with shock. "Then why didn't you stop us?" I smiled, and it wasn't a nice expression. "Because I wanted to see how far you'd go. I wanted to understand exactly what kind of people I'd been married to and partnered with. Blake, please. We can fix this. The FBI doesn't have to know about the conservatorship plan. We can tell them Mason was manipulating both of us." "Both of us? You because of your mental state, me because of the pregnancy. We were both vulnerable, and he took advantage. Even now, even with her world collapsing around her, she was trying to manipulate me, trying to position herself as another victim of Mason's schemes." "Sadie," I said gently, "I recorded our conversation about the conservatorship." Her face went white. "What conversation?" "Tuesday night, when you and Mason were planning my intervention. I had the house wired for sound 2 weeks ago." It was a lie, but a believable one. She was remembering that night, trying to recall exactly what had been said and whether it could be used against her in court. "The FBI would be very interested to hear Mason's voice explaining how you were going to use my fabricated mental illness to seize control of my assets," I continued. "Especially the part where you both laughed about the baby that isn't mine." She was crying now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration and fear, the emotional breakdown of someone who'd finally realized they'd been outplayed. "What do you want?" she asked. "I want you out of my house. Tonight." "Blake, be reasonable. I'm pregnant. I don't have anywhere to go. You should have thought of that before you decided to destroy my life. I'm your wife. You're a thief and a liar who's carrying another man's child. Our marriage ended the moment you started planning my institutionalization." She stood up, her composure cracking completely. "You can't just throw me out. I have rights." "Actually, you don't. This house is in my name only." "The business is in my name only. And thanks to your little conspiracy with Mason, you're about to be a convicted felon." The next morning, I called my lawyer and filed for divorce. The papers cited adultery, fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. I also requested a paternity test and asked the court to freeze all joint assets pending the outcome of the FBI investigation. Sadie tried to fight it, of course. Her lawyer argued that I was mentally unstable, that my accusations were the paranoid delusions of a man suffering from stress-induced psychosis, but they couldn't produce Dr. Patterson's evaluation to support their claim because Dr. Patterson had refused to sign it. "Your husband's concerns about being manipulated appear to have merit," he told Sadie's lawyer. "I cannot in good conscience recommend conservatorship when there's evidence that the people requesting it may have ulterior motives." The FBI investigation moved quickly once they had Mason in custody. Faced with 15 years in federal prison, he started talking within hours of his arrest. He gave them everything: the shell companies, the fake invoices, the offshore accounts, and yes, the conservatorship plan. The recordings of my fake mental episodes, which Sadie had planned to use as evidence of my incompetence, instead became evidence of their conspiracy to commit fraud. Every documented breakdown, every recorded conversation, every psychiatric evaluation, it all supported the FBI's case that Mason and Sadie had been systematically attempting to steal my business through legal manipulation. 3 weeks later, I sat in Felix's office reading the final reports. Mason had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Sadie had accepted a plea deal for 3 years, with the possibility of serving her sentence in a minimum security facility suitable for pregnant inmates. "How do you feel?" Felix asked, lighting his usual cigarette. I thought about the question seriously. Empty, I said finally. 23 years of my life reduced to court documents and criminal charges. You won, Blake. They tried to destroy you, and instead they destroyed themselves. Did I win? Or did I just survive? Felix studied me through the smoke. What's the difference? I didn't have an answer for that. The house felt enormous and quiet without Sadie's presence. The business was mine alone now, but running it felt like performing maintenance on a machine I no longer cared about. The paternity test had confirmed what we all knew. The baby wasn't mine. Sadie was 4 months into a pregnancy that would come to term while she was in federal custody. The child would be born into the foster care system, another casualty of their parents' greed and betrayal. There's something else, Felix said, sliding a manila envelope across his desk. Elena wanted you to have this. Inside was a single photograph, Mason and Sadie together at a restaurant, taken months before I'd hired Felix. They were holding hands across the table, looking at each other with the intensity of new lovers planning a future together. On the back, Elena had written, "Taken 6 months before you knew." They were never planning to just leave you. They were always planning to destroy you. I stared at the photograph for a long time, memorizing their faces. They looked happy, confident, certain that their plan would work and that I would never be smart enough or strong enough to fight back. They'd been wrong about the smart part. The strong part was still in question. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. I kept the house, the business, and all the assets they hadn't managed to steal. Sadie kept nothing except her criminal record and her pregnancy. On the day the papers were signed, I drove to the federal courthouse where she was being held pending sentencing. I didn't go inside. I just sat in my truck across the street, looking at the building where my wife was learning what it meant to be caged. A reporter recognized me and approached the truck with a camera crew. "Mr. Rennick," she said, shoving a microphone toward my window. "How does it feel to see your wife facing prison time for stealing from your company?" I rolled down the window and looked directly into the camera. "She's not my wife anymore," I said. "And she didn't steal from my company. She stole from herself. Everything she took, everything she thought she deserved, it was already hers. We were married. We were partners. She could have had half of everything just by asking. So why do you think she chose to steal instead?" I thought about that question for a moment, really considered it. "Because taking half wasn't enough," I said finally. "She wanted it all. She wanted me destroyed, not just divorced. She wanted to take everything I'd built and then step on the pieces. And now?" I looked back at the courthouse, thinking about Sadie in her orange jumpsuit, counting down the days until she gave birth to another man's child in a federal medical facility. "Now she has nothing," I said. "Nothing except the knowledge that she destroyed her own life trying to destroy mine." I drove away without answering any more questions. That evening, I sat in my empty house, drinking whiskey by the fireplace and thinking about revenge. They'd wanted me broken. They'd wanted me institutionalized and helpless while they lived their new life on the money they'd stolen from me. Instead, Mason was in federal prison, facing 12 years of looking over his shoulder and trying to survive among criminals who didn't appreciate financial fraud. Sadie was in a different kind of prison, carrying a child she'd never get to raise while contemplating 3 years of orange jumpsuits and supervised visits. And I was alone in a house that felt like a mausoleum, successful in my revenge, but hollow in my victory. Felix called that night with a final update. Mason's cellmate is a guy named Tommy Vega. Armed robbery, assault, the usual resume. Word is that Tommy doesn't like white-collar criminals who steal from working people. "I didn't ask you to arrange that," I said. "You didn't have to. Some things arrange themselves." After I hung up, I poured another whiskey and walked out to the back patio where this had all started. The spot where I'd first learned about Sadie's affair, where I'd listened to Felix play that recording of their laughter. The night was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic. No phones buzzing with conspiracies. No whispered conversations about conservatorships and mental health evaluations. No pregnant wife planning my destruction while pretending to love me. Just silence. Deep, profound silence that stretched out like a promise of peace or a threat of emptiness. I couldn't tell which. I thought about calling someone, but there wasn't anyone to call. Mason had been my business partner and closest friend. Sadie had been my wife and confidant. The few other relationships I'd maintained over the years had been casualties of the investigation and trial, people who distanced themselves from the scandal. Felix had been right about one thing. Once you started down the path of revenge, there was no going back. I'd destroyed my enemies completely, but I'd also destroyed the life I'd been trying to protect. The house was paid for. The business was thriving. My bank accounts were full. And I had never felt more alone in my life. I finished my whiskey and went inside, turning off lights and checking locks like I'd done every night for 23 years. But tonight, the routine felt different. Tonight, it felt like the closing ceremony for a life that was over. Tomorrow, I would wake up in an empty house and drive to a business that no longer brought me joy. I would make money and pay bills and pretend that winning had been worth the cost. But tonight, I would lie in my bed and listen to the silence, remembering the sound of their laughter when they thought they'd beaten me. They'd wanted me broken. Now they were buried, and I was learning that sometimes victory and defeat look exactly the same from the inside.